The imposition argument is dead, part 2. Um, Poodle Susan did a video response to my connotative argument or connotative argument about the antinatalists and my reduction that their use of the word imposition is being used abstractly and hence connotatively. And her response was to say that life wasn't the imposition in the comments, but that procreation is an imposition, because imposition means to lay upon, on, in, or into, and that procreation is creation, and hence you're creating a life and putting it into existence. And so I let a lot of the fallout come from this video before I could explain why it is the imposition argument is still dead, and try to find a nuance that can explain this subtle difference between the way that it's being used and what it is I'm getting at. And the subtle difference was found through an analogy. And so if we use an analog to describe imposition, we still run into problems with the subject of the imposition being the object that is doing the imposing. And that seems to be the problem, is that the object doing the imposing is also the child, and yet the object and the subject of the imposition are the same thing. And the analogy is Jack stabs an apple with a knife. Okay, so the analogy is like the knife would be the child or the imposition. The knife is the imposition, and the imposition is upon the apple, and the perpetrator of the imposition is Jack. And so the argument stems from the idea that to say procreation is imposition would be like saying Jack stabs the knife. But stabs the knife into what? So procreation is imposition. Imposition into what? If Jack stabs the knife into the apple, what is being imposed upon? Well, the parents procreate, the child is put forth as that which is imposing, and it enters into life, and then it's said that life is that which is imposing upon the child. So that would be like changing the analogy and saying, well, Jack dives into the pool, Jack imposes upon the pool, right? But because the pool isn't sentient, we say, well, Jack imposed upon himself by jumping into the pool, or Jack was pushed into the pool by somebody. And so the problem is still the subject. The problem is still the subject of the child is said to be that which is imposed upon, and yet the child is that which is doing the entering into, doing the imposing, the entering into or upon life, right? So life itself, which I say, the child is the imposition, and then later has a psychological understanding of life, and through that psychology is burdened by that psychology at that point and blames it on life. So the imposition argument is being blamed on life. So until somebody can say procreation is imposition into what? Instead of procreation is imposition, procreation is the act of entering. So the knife is in the act of entering what? Air? The apple? What's the X? What's the subject? That was the point of my first argument. That's been the point the whole time. What is the subject that is doing the imposing, and what is the subject that's being imposed upon? And my argument is that the child is the thing doing the imposing. The child is the knife, not the child is the apple. So it's a directional argument. It's based on an analogy. It's based on a missing subject. If you look up imposition, the history of imposition, or the etymology of imposition, impostito or impostitionem, you'll see it comes from the government levying a tax upon the people. So tax being levied upon the people, right? You got two subjects. You got tax and you got people. Well, if you made the analogy with saying procreation is imposition, that would be like saying government taxes. The government taxes, but taxes whom? Right? So since that by default life, between life and the child, the only one that's sentient, because it's the only one that's sentient, it by default gets the subject of being the imposed as well as being the object of doing the imposition. Right? But the antinatalist is going to say, no, it's the parents are the object of the imposition. So the parents are Jack. The child is, according to the antinatalist, the apple. So what's doing the imposing into the apple? Well, it's said once again to be life. And I say that's like saying somebody, you wouldn't be using the word imposition at that point, because the word imposition, the etymology refers to that which goes in and into as well as on and upon. But it's not like if Jack jumps into a swimming pool, the swimming pool being bigger than Jack, being greater than Jack, imposes upon Jack. Jack imposed upon the swimming pool. That's the argument. Now, Poodle Susan then wants to know how this is connotative. So,
1. What abstract meaning is attributed by the antinatalist position that is not part of these words?
Literal. Okay, so the part that's not being attributed appropriately is the subject. The subject is missing, so there's an abstract difference between that which is being imposed, the subject of the imposition, and the object of the imposition, namely both of them being the child.
Literal and primary meanings. 2. What intention of the antinatalist use of these words is not attributable to their literal and primary meaning?
Okay, find any other use of the word imposition that does not have a subject, an object, and a function. The government, the tax, and the people. Right? You have three. Jack, the knife, the apple. Find any other usage and then look at the antinatalist usage, and you'll find that they're using the subject and the object as the same thing, namely the child.
3. What principles are formed by the antinatalist use of these words, which is not formed by the literal and primary meanings of these words?
Okay. If you use imposition in its primary definition, you're going to find that the child is the analogy to the knife. Right? It's not the analogy to the apple. If you want to say it's the analogy to the apple, then all of a sudden you violate the etymological history and the definition of the word imposition, meaning in and into. Right? Because it would be exterior to it. Hence, it would not be an imposition upon, an imposition into. So the antinatalist use of those words is abstracted.
And 4. What objects or concepts are applied to by these principles, which are not applied to by the literal and primary meanings of these words?
Okay, the literal and primary meaning of the word imposition would be to enter, lay upon. It would be like a tax, a levy, a burden, a weight, something like that that's laid upon, right? See, so I'm just trying to get at the whole idea that the imposition argument it's structured as a secondarily armatured argument where the subject and the object of the imposing, that which is being flung into the world like the knife is the child, and that which is being imposed upon is also the child, right? So the way in which it's being used primarily, the word imposition, does not match up with the way that the antinatalist is using the word imposition relative to the directionality, the subject-object, the lack of a subject. Okay, so if you can see my point, then you understand my argument. If you can't see my point, then you're probably in the antinatalist camp, and you're going to remain seeing the structure of the argument in the same sense. So if you can see the subtlety that I'm making, then you'll see how it is the imposition argument is secondarily built to point the subject back to the object, namely the child. Okay, feel free to comment and respond, etc. Of course.